The room was already tense with anticipation, a thick, invisible fog hanging in the air that seemed to settle into every crevice of the broadcast studio. The lights glared down from overhead fixtures like the judgmental eyes of history itself, unblinking and unwavering, casting sharp shadows against the smooth surfaces of the set. Megyn Kelly sat tall in her chair, her posture composed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes. They told a different story. Beneath the cool exterior was a storm of conviction. For weeks, months, really she had been preparing for this moment, gathering documents, sourcing testimonies, digging through financial records and archived footage, piecing together a picture that the public had long been denied. This wasn't about ratings. This wasn't about partisan glory. This, to her, was about truth. Not the branded, massaged version spoon-fed to audiences by polished press releases and glossy memoirs, but the raw, jagged truth that had been carefully concealed behind layers of charisma myth-making. An media apparatus reluctant to challenge a sacred narrative, Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States, was more than a man, he was a symbol. To some, he was the embodiment of progress, an eloquent leader who pulled the country out of crisis and stood as a living rebuke to the nation's troubled racial history. To others, he was a skilled politician who knew how to use identity, perception, and institutional power to his advantage, but rarely, if ever, had the public been given unfiltered access to the full reality of the man behind the icon. It was about to change. As the countdown to live broadcast ticked closer to zero, Megyn steadied herself, mentally reviewing every detail of what she was about to disclose. It was more than just a story. It was a cascade of revelations, the inconsistencies in Obama's financial disclosures, the quiet property acquisitions under shell companies, the confidential speaking agreements that funneled tens of millions from global firms with vested interests in U.S. policy, the whispers of influence traded not in dark alleys but over golf courses and gala dinners, all of it meticulously documented, all of it ready to be laid bare. All of it, she knew, would ignite a firestorm unlike anything seen since the days of Watergate. As the red on-air light blinked to life, the broadcast began, and Megyn's voice, calm, deliberate, undeniable, cut through the silence like a blade. Tonight, she began, her gaze unflinching as she looked directly into the camera. We confront a legacy not with malice, not with cynicism, but with the relentless obligation to uncover what's been hidden. The American people deserve the truth. She paused just long enough to let the words sink in. Over the next hour, you will see documents, hear audio, and watch testimonies that challenge the official story you've been told about Barack Obama's post-presidency life, his financial empire, and the quiet networks of influence that have helped shape his enduring public image. The control room fell silent. Even the producers, seasoned veterans of high-stakes television, sensed something seismic unfolding. This wasn't political theater. This was an earthquake. And far away, in a heavily guarded home in Martha's Vineyard, Obama himself watched with a furrowed brow, arms crossed, the flicker of the television reflected in his glasses. He had been warned. Friends in the media had hinted at what was coming, but none of them had anticipated that it would be Megyn, poised, fearless, and backed by an arsenal of facts that would dare to rip the curtain down. Obama's eyes didn't blink as the report unfolded. His fingers tapped lightly against the side of his chair, a nervous rhythm betraying the calm demeanor he had perfected over the years. He'd been in the spotlight too long to show visible cracks, but this was different. This wasn't a hostile blogger or an anonymous tweet. This was mainstream, primetime. And Megyn wasn't hedging her language. She was coming in precise, clinical, relentless. The first blow came in the form of a document-on, innocuous-looking financial form submitted during his post-presidency years. One that seemed standard until she highlighted a discrepancy, a reported income from an obscure LLC based in Delaware, linked to a consulting firm that had received international contracts connected to foreign governments. On paper, Megyn explained, clicking to zoom in on the signature line. This company appeared to be a passive investment vehicle, But in reality, it was the central node of a much larger financial web one that funneled over $87 million. Between 2017 and 2023, the studio screen flashed graphs, bank transfers, shell company registries. Each detail had a timestamp. Each piece tied back to Obama's post-presidential foundation, to his speaking tour, to a private real estate trust used to purchase properties under anonymous ownership filings. Back in his private residence, Obama leaned forward. His advisors had dismissed the rumors for years. An article here. Whistleblower, they're always explained away, always brushed off as sour grapes or partisan distortion. But Megyn had assembled something more dangerous than outrage. She had assembled a story that made sense. It's a narrative lined with dates, transactions, and testimonies that overlapped too precisely to ignore. She continued, now narrating a hidden camera interview with a former staffer from the Obama Foundation's overseas operations team. The man, his voice altered but words precise, described how international donations were routed through secondary organizations to mask their origin. It was legal, he admitted, but the intention was clear: make the money look clean. Distance the foundation from the real donors. Megyn cut back in, her tone now tightening. And who were those donors you'll see shortly? But first, how did this money influence policy even after Obama left office? The screen shifted again, this time 2 emails, leaked from a secure internal server, where former staff discussed ongoing policy lobbying efforts with former foreign leaders, using access gained during the Obama presidency. The language was diplomatic. Plausible deniability was built into every line. But the implication was obvious. Influence wasn't just retained. It was Mona City. Obama sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His team would need to respond immediately. His longtime aide Valerie Jarrett was already on the phone, issuing quiet directives to trusted contacts in the media. The goal: discredit the source, question the timing, remind the public of his legacy. But Megyn wasn't finished. She brought up the real estate, the private beachfront mansion in Martha's Vineyard, bought through a trust controlled by a legal firm linked to 3 other property acquisitions across the country. The Obama you see in public is a man of restraint, she said, but behind the scenes the lifestyle is opulent. He speaks of income inequality while collecting speaking fees that dwarf the annual budgets of most nonprofits. He warns of climate disaster from the balcony of a multi-million-dollar coastal estate. It wasn't just about hypocrisy, it was about contradiction, image versus reality. The man who had campaigned on hope, humility, and transparency now appeared, at least in Megyn's version of the story, to be entangled in the very elite machinery he once denounced. And still, she pressed on. The final blow of the segment came with a testimony from an ex-aide who once worked closely with the former president during his transition out of office. Soft-spoken woman in her 40s, her face in shadow, described how speaking engagements were booked not just for the platform, but for the contacts. It was networking, she said, but not the way most people imagine. Each appearance was a signal to certain institutions. Obama's still connected, still available, still valuable. The implication was clear: Obama wasn't just a former president. He was a political brand, and that brand had been leveraged to maintain influence at the highest levels of finance, tech, and global philanthropy. Megyn closed the segment with a question, not a conclusion. What does it mean? She asked slowly. When power doesn't step away quietly. When the post-presidency becomes an empire of influence built on legacy, nostalgia, and a carefully managed narrative? The screen faded to black, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Phones began ringing before the credits even finished rolling. Inside cable newsrooms, among podcast hosts, on Capitol Hill, and within the gated communities of America's elite, the ripple effect of Megyn Kelly's report was already building into a tidal wave. Journalists scrambled to verify the documents she presented, some of which had never been seen before in public. Fact-checkers were divided. Those inclined toward Obama's camp dismissed them as out of context or misleading, while others, more skeptical, began digging into the filings themselves and finding disturbing confirmations. In the background of this media frenzy, A quieter but more consequential reaction was brewing one in the public psyche. Social media ignited, not just with partisan screeds, but with genuine confusion and alarm. How had this happened? How had the man who left office with grace and global admiration managed to build a post-presidential machine so complex, so wealthy, and so hidden in plain sight? Obama's PR team was swift, but not fast enough. Statements were issued, subtle. Rebukes were made. Mainstream editorial boards ran pieces affirming his character and cautioning against conspiratorial journalism. But the horse had bolted. The details Megyn unleashed were too granular, too coherent, and too corroborated to be written off entirely. The report didn't hinge on anonymous accusations. It rested on banking trails, legal filings, leaked audio, recordings, and tax data from international sources. Most damning was a contract obtained through a whistleblower, a lucrative speaking arrangement with a Chinese conglomerate, negotiated through a subsidiary where the fee exceeded $2 million. For a single event. The event, Megyn revealed, was canceled at the last minute and never rescheduled. Yet the payment was processed in full with no refunds requested. Why? She asked rhetorically during the segment. Would any corporation, let alone one, tied to a foreign government, pay millions for a speech that never occurred? The unspoken answer was clear. The payment wasn't for words, it was for access or allegiance or silence. Within 24 hours, Obama's circle moved into full defense mode. Allies appeared on rival networks to denounce the report, citing the former president's years of public service, his clean image, and the improbability of such a scheme remaining unnoticed for so long. But their very defensiveness fed the growing perception that the report had struck a nerve. On conservative media, Megyn was hailed as a journalistic warrior. On liberal platforms, she was accused of character assassination and ambition-driven sensationalism. But neither camp could ignore one central, chilling question. What if the story was true? What if the Obama legacy, so carefully curated over more than a decade, was in part a construction? An illusion designed to sustain influence, while concealing a sprawling empire of wealth, strategic partnerships, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering? Obama had not simply walked away from power. He had morphed into something more elusive and perhaps more dangerous. A private citizen with presidential access. A media darling who remained above reproach, and a global celebrity who used nostalgia as both shield and sword. Behind closed doors, panic set in. Donors to Obama's foundation, some of whom were now implicated in the documents Megyn displayed, began seeking legal counsel. Foundations, charities, and event sponsors quietly reviewed their own records, wary of being caught in the vortex. The IRS declined to comment, but insiders whispered of internal reviews that were now impossible to ignore. Lawmakers, always hungry for relevance, seized the moment. A handful of congressional Republicans called for hearings, invoking the need for transparency in the post-presidency economy. Even Democrats, long deferential to Obama's towering image, were now divided. Some called the report a smear campaign, while others privately admitted they'd always wondered about the money. That was the other power of Megyn's revelations. They put words and evidence to suspicions that had long simmered beneath the surface, but were too impolitic to say aloud. But it wasn't just politics or legality at stake, it was legacy. Obama's brand had been built not only on speeches and legislation, but on story. The story of a young, biracial man rising through adversity to lead the most powerful nation on earth. A story of grace under pressure, intellectual calm, and chaotic times of dignity amidst division. That story had become armor, but now, for the first time, cracks were visible. Megyn wasn't simply accusing him of hypocrisy, she was dismantling the scaffolding of that story. Her tone had been icy, yes, but never reckless. She chose her words with legal precision, citing sources, context, and corroborating evidence at every step. The broadcast had been structured like a trial, each segment a line of prosecution, each pause a dare to refute. The result? It landed not like a tabloid scoop, but like an indictment.